Welcome to one more crucial conversation. My name is Joanne Richards Goff, and I am the editor of the KW magazine. Now, Crucial Conversations comes to you courtesy of the KW magazine, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture. And we exist to facilitate conversations about worship and cultural identity among Christ followers on the African continent and in her diasporas. We want to get to know each other better. We want to get to know ourselves better. And ultimately, we want to build deeper, more authentic relationships with our Creator, Yahweh. So now come, call on a friend them and call your relatives, anyone that you think would be interested in having a crucial conversation. So what we're going to do now is to play the theme song, Come, Make We Worship, while you get a chance to call your friends. All right. Here we got, yes. And by the way, I want to say, you are joining us on Facebook Live. Please let us know where you are watching from. Yes, if you're on the continent or you are in some part of the diaspora, in Jamaica, in the US, in the UK, Uno come. Tell us where you are. Whoa. Yeah. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come, make we worship him. Now we protect him. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come, make we worship him. Now we deliver. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we worship him. Come, make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Yeah. All right. I hope you were successful in sharing it to your page. I hope you were more successful than I was in sharing it to my page. So if you don't find it, please put it on my page so that people can see it. All right, so welcome again to everyone. Now, in the room, before I get around to introducing our very, very special guest who is here for the second time on Crucial Conversations, I want to just let you know that we do have some other people in the room. As usual, we have Dana, who is all the way in Canada, but helping us online to interface with you, our Facebook crew. And then last week, we were watching a lecture that was delivered by Professor Hilary Beckles. And we had 4 young people responding to it live in the room with us. And those 4 young people, at short notice, agreed to come back into the room this week so that they can, yes, sit at Professor Lewis's feet and learn something new, and also ask their questions live if they have any questions. So welcome to you, Nico. Welcome to you, Anord. Welcome to you, Candice, and I think Anya is watching from the other side of the screen. So welcome, Anya. It is really good to know that you made the time to be with us to have this crucial conversation. But yes, last year we had with us Professor Rupert Lewis, and we learned so many new things from him, as well as were inspired and motivated and all kinds of great things. So we have today again Professor Rupert Lewis, Professor Emeritus at the University of the West Indies. He's here on the Mona campus, and he is a Garveyite. I introduced him as being erudite the last time. Let me not leave it off again. And he has written so much about Marcus Garvey. He is our resident specialist on Marcus Garvey for so many reasons. And Professor Lewis, we are so grateful that you have joined us once again. And I see that Philbert Needham, who was here the last time you were here and who was one of the people calling for a part two, he's in the room again. Amal Babio is saying it's wonderful to be here. Greetings and blessings, everyone. Yes, yes, yes. And whoever else is there, just let us know. Dana will let me know right here inside the chat room. But Professor, we are grateful, very, very grateful, because the things you know, we could never know unless you taught them.
I'm not sure about that, but thank you very much.
This is your classroom. Yes, and I see too that Pauline Kathleen Reed from all the way in the UK is online as well. Welcome, Pauline. And yes, we do have your question. We have Emma's question. We have Philbert's question. So these are people who sent in questions. And we are hoping that we'll be able to answer them. I want to say a big shout out to Denise, who's usually inside the Zoom room with us and interfacing with our guests. But unfortunately, Denise is not doing well today. I want to just ask that you send up a prayer, a special prayer for Denise. All right. So, Professor, where will we begin? Because the last time you said some things, and I went back through the interview and I had some questions. Like, we heard from you, as I said to you, we heard from you right here that they wanted to bury Marcus Garvey in Africa, in Ghana. Now, can you tell us that story again for those who never heard it that time? And then can you tell us more stories like that about African leaders who respected and maybe even revered Marcus Garvey?
Okay, well, thank you for having me back again. And I appreciate the opportunity to engage on the questions that you have and will raise. But Garvey was revered by the political leader Kwame Nkrumah, who led Ghana to independence in 1957. And I'll just quote as a brief statement from Kwame Nkrumah with respect to the impact of Garvey on his life. Nkrumah said, "I think that of all the literature I studied, the book that did more than any other to fire my enthusiasm was The Philosophy of Marcus Garvey,
Wow.
Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, published by his wife." And Nkrumah also had many other things to say about Garvey. He came into contact with the ideas of Garvey when he was at Lincoln University studying in the 1930s. And Nkrumah went back to the Gold Coast, as it was then known, to lead the struggle there for the independence of his country. But before going there, he had developed a very close relationship with a Trinidadian Pan-Africanist, very distinguished, about whom more needs to be known. His name was George Padmore. George Padmore was his pseudonym because in those days, a lot of activists had to be very careful with respect to their security, because the colonial countries would get rid of people who were seen to be leading movements against them. So
Right.
George Patton was really known as, was born Malcolm Nurse in Trinidad. And he was a very important advisor and mentor to, Kwame Nkrumah. So Nkrumah was, in a sense, nurtured by two Caribbean figures,
Wow.
Marcus Garvey, the Garvey movement, and George Padmore, who functioned a lot in Britain in the 30s through to the 50s. He died in 1959. He was living in Ghana. He was advisor to Kwame Nkrumah, and he was buried in Ghana. The other person who was buried was Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. Anybody who has any knowledge of African American history would know of Dr. W.E. Du Bois, a seminal historian, pioneer, sociologist, a great intellectual. And Du Bois was buried there in 1963. And Nkrumah wanted Garvey to be buried in Ghana, and negotiations were underway when Jamaica got wind of that, and efforts were made by the then government led by Sir Alexander Bustamante, who deputed a young minister, Edward Seaga, to take responsibility for the repatriation of Garvey's remains to Jamaica in 1964. So that was the context in which the decision was taken. If Jamaica hadn't woken up yet to the significance of Garvey, but the response to the return of the body was so overwhelming in Jamaica that it would have, I think this was a proper place for him to be.
Wow. So it wasn't, the people didn't really, it wasn't that the government, it was really the people of Jamaica who were showing that kind of
there
regard.
was strong interest and a desire for knowledge about Garvey, because our educational system at the time did not really highlight Black history in any shape or form. It was largely a history that was on the way to being changed, because after the 38 labor rebellion, people like Richard Hart, the novelist Vic Reed, and others started to write histories as well as novels about the Jamaican nation. Sir Philip Sherlock, who was a vice chancellor of the University of West Indies, was himself a part of that movement that evolved out of the 1930s. So that new movement, which was the base, which we call really the national movement. Jamaica had a national movement coming out of the 30s and 40s, in which people gave of their time, did considerable volunteering work, developed trade unions. There was this very strong civic consciousness. And it happened throughout the Caribbean, not only Jamaica. Trinidad had a national movement that was built up around, first of all, Tubal Uriah Butler, the Union figure of the 1930s, and later Dr. Eric Williams, who was, I think, foremost in the political education of the new nation. And in all the territories, there were these nationalist leaders who were able to mold a spirit of community and shape a national agenda. And so that it is in that context that people wanted to know their history. And Garvey was a focal point because for a number of reasons, one of which I'll stress is that the Jamaicans who had gone to Panama, Costa Rica, the United States, the Windrush generation, and so on, that diaspora was very strong in the demand for Jamaica to become a nation, people coming back from Cuba and so on, all of whom had been active in the organizations, associations, and clubs of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League.
Yes, and Nico is saying, by the way, I'm glad that you mentioned Trinidad, because one of the things that we say we want to do is to get to know ourselves better. And this ourselves is, we are here in Jamaica, but we need to build better relationships with the people in the region, you know, and so this is a good time for me to mention. Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the south of Trinidad was the bastion of the Garvey movement in Trinidad and Tobago. South of Trinidad, that's where the Garveyites were strongest. Yes. And they were very important in the emergence of support for Eric Williams's agenda for independence.
This is good to know. So, Candice, I know you are here and you're listening. If you could just step in. Yes, South Trinidad is representing in the room. And, you know, Candice, just quickly, can you tell us if you had ever heard anything of the Garvey movement in Trinidad, growing up in South Trinidad?
Okay. So hi, thanks for being here. While he was speaking there, I remembered going to primary school in San Fernando. We have this public promenade, right? And there are different statues and symbols and figures on the promenade. And if you walk alongside the promenade in San Fernando, you will see a monument, a statue of Garvey, right? And the sad thing about it, though, is that it's the way it's designed. There's like a kind of amphitheater feel with a staircase that people could actually sit and have conversations. Now, there used to be some activity happening there, but it's no longer. So it would be really nice to have conversations close to this monument, and let's see, okay, we have this figure here. Who is this person? Why is he here? Why do we think he needs to be part of this fabric and part of this architecture? And Professor is right. Garvey has somewhere kind of drifted out of our curriculums, out of our conversations. And I think right now, for the millennial to know about Marcus Garvey, it has to be an individual interest, because it's, unless you're studying Black history in university or something like that, right? But it's not there. So that is why this conversation is crucial, so that we could start having more narratives around Marcus Garvey.
Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us that insight into what is happening in Trinidad. And Nico in the room is saying, remember too, and he's referring now to just what was happening at the time when Garvey's bones were brought back. He was saying, remember too, that this was at the time when Jamaica needed to build its national symbols and monuments. And so they would have been interested in the icon of Garvey for that reason. So it's kind of like a self-interest in a sense, but not really getting the full picture, as can be seen by the fact that, you know, we have not necessarily implemented many of the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. But anyway, I want to know that you've mentioned Trinidad. Where else did Garvey have a following, and particularly in Central and South America? What can you tell us about that?
Well, he was in Costa Rica in 1910, where he published a newspaper called La Nación, which was both in English and Spanish, a bilingual paper. And it should be noted that the Negro World, which he later published, was trilingual, with sections not only in Spanish, but in French. He also, in the period 1910 to 1911, was in Guatemala, British Honduras, as well as visited Panama. And those were, particularly Panama, Costa Rica, huge communities of West Indians. And in that context, Garvey became bilingual, because migration does encourage language acquisition. And so he was pretty fluent in Spanish, to the extent that he was publishing in both languages. So he had an exposure to the West Indian, the broad West Indian migration in Central America. And Costa Rica in particular and Panama were two of the locations where the movement was strong. Up until recently, there was an active Liberty Hall in Costa Rica. And unfortunately, fire did damage, but they are rebuilding. And of course, Panama is quite simply one of the origins of, certainly for, there's so many Barbadians who went to Panama. That is literally the ancestral home of many Barbadian families. They are going into building that Panama, that huge transcontinental, that whole bridge between Atlantic and so on. The Panama Canal, which allow people to, allow shipping to have easier access to our part of the world.
So would you say that there is connection now between, among all those places where Garvey made an impact and built a following? Is there any connection? Yes?
There is a connection if one adds Cuba. I'm in touch with the descendants of generation of Garveyites who were in Cuba in the 1920s. Still in touch with the grandchildren and to some extent great-grandchildren. So there are ancestral links that exist in Costa Rica, in Cuba, in Panama. So if you call Garvey's name, just as how Candice could point to a representation of Garvey, there are representations and memories in ancestral homes in all of these countries.
Wow. So just to connect with some of the people in the room, Yvonne Comrie is saying it's great to remember Garvey, our great hero. Amma Ababio is saying, true Candy, she was agreeing with you. She says, even when I was younger, I had to find Garvey for myself, and his work influenced me to return to Africa to live and work. We need to give him a prominent place in our school curricula in the Caribbean. Yes, yes, yes.
And that's curious. I'm curious to know, seeing that this man has started so many different movements and stirred up so many like notable changes in different societies. I think like one of the questions, Joanne, that came up was, we have, I think it was stated by Professor or stated in the conversation that we have inherited a legacy that is hostile to the assertiveness of Black identity. And we know that if we don't have conversations about persons who helped form our identity, then it could be lost. So then, Professor, the question is, what are some of the signs of this? You know, this whole thing of legacy being hostile and assertive to the Black identity, and how could we encourage the church to be involved in this conversation or to help us? Because sometimes in some circles we shy away from certain conversations because we're not sure what the effect on the other side may be. So how could we make sense of this?
Yes. Well, you see, one of the challenges in dealing with the question you asked, a very important question about the legacy, is that this legacy is due to 307 years of slavery and colonialism. And I don't think we sufficiently wrap our minds around what that means. It's a number, it's a big figure, but we don't understand the depth of the legacy of the past in the present, in our lives, in our makeup. And moreover, we have had, certainly for Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, this year, 59 years of independence. In my view, religious symbols speak to the divine, the transcendent. They are the moorings of our morality. They speak to us at a level that is beyond the material world. So in the first interaction we had, I spoke about the missionary version of Christianity. I lived that missionary version through my father and through the British Baptist missionaries with whom we interacted. For the millennial generation, you all would not have had that direct impact. That impact is that when you see a white person in your church before you who determines the theological doctrine, the interpretation of the Bible, and who your hymnals, the way the scriptures are interpreted, the silences in the scriptures, the absence of any narrative on Ethiopia and on the blacks in the Bible. All of those silences, it takes a re-education to understand that there was Christianity before Europe and before colonialism in which Africans were engaged. There were black popes, there were black saints. There is a whole liturgy. So there is a history there that needs to be part of the theological education that in our schools. Moreover, when these symbols that we have in our church, white symbols, reinforce white supremacy as they have, we are in deep trouble. And sometimes we don't even realize how deep that trouble is. Symbols of Christ and the saints in most churches, in remote villages, in little nooks and crannies all over the Caribbean, the symbols are white and people are not taught to question why. They simply assume that this is how the spiritual world and the symbols of the spiritual world are to be represented. So black images are still rare in churches. How many churches you know where you have black saints, black images? It's still a journey in our minds, in our psychology that we have to make. The Garvey movement spoke to the African components of the Bible, stressed its geography, spoke of Ethiopia and its long history of Christianity before Europe. But it also spoke to the black clergymen of their time and the struggles against slavery and for freedom, very much in the tradition out of which Martin Luther king came. And I want to refer to a book by the late Canon Ernley Gordon called Liberation Theology, where in the 70s and 80s, he did a whole series of articles, including a critique of the church, the Anglican Church, of which he was a canon, talking about the Anglican Church and slavery. So there is a need for a critical engagement with our spiritual legacies. And what John is doing with language, with music, with the magazine is part of spiritual decolonization because we have been colonized spiritually. And when you're colonized spiritually, believe you me, that is the ultimate form of colonization because the transcendency is a reflection of our human effort to encompass our small space in a broader reality, to deal with our mortality. These are fundamental things, spirituality. And therefore the decolonization of the colonial legacies of our spirituality becomes an issue that we cannot ignore.
Wow. And amen, amen. Candice, you just kind of like, whoa, right?
I am like, we opening up some things here.
These are the truths. Anord, by the way, is saying that Garvey is a channel of Pan-Africanism, and he's speaking as a Tanzanian. Africans from across the world have realized their worth and are proud to be connected to Africa. And it's a direct result of the work that Garvey has done. And Marcel Goff, of course, Mbununu's husband, is saying that Garvey should be taught in the schools, the churches, and the university, and of course, at home. And I'm just scrolling down here because a lot of people are getting involved now in this crucial conversation. Nico Smith is saying, amen. The Caribbean Theology Project is one that responds to these issues and needs. And it really is unfortunate that I think it has been subdued a lot in recent times, this Caribbean Theology Project. And the foreign way of processing our spirituality is what has taken root and sidelined, I would say, the Caribbean Theology Project. Beverly Young is saying, we are getting one-sided theological education. We really had no idea. Thanks for the exposition, she says. Yes, thank you very much. Very much. Yes. Ama Ababio. I don't know. I'm just looking in. Go ahead, Candice.
You know, while Professor was talking there, he reminded me of an experience that happened to me in my second year at university, because I went to the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and I did theater arts, and we had this course called critical reading, but it was around the Caribbean, right? And we had this project where we had to choose a group of people in society and study them, like go visit them, interview them, and so on. And I said, why don't we go and visit the Bobo Shanties? And everybody was like, nah, we can't go there. I said, why? I said, don't worry, they're cool. I have a friend, we call him Bobo. He lime on campus, he eat with us, drink with us. I could talk to him, he talk to his people, we go. My word, we got the connection. They told us, stay away from alcohol and meat, and keep your body pure and nice, cover up our head, the ladies, wear a skirt, and come up in the hills. But because people were so afraid of all the narratives that came from on the ground and not really from the hill, it just trickled down, and as it trickled down, the narrative changed. That kind of sparked a big insight in me. And I think Professor said it. He said, people are afraid of Rastafari,
Yes.
right? I was wondering, you know, because one of the questions we're having is why would you say such a thing and what is the solution? Because it is a reality, and I think we shy away from our realities thinking we could create solutions without facing them. So like Professor,
Excellent.
what could you say to this? Because I and everybody else need to get the scoop on this.
Yeah, well, I think not, Candice, what you are saying about the Baba Shanti and so on. There have historically been groups of people, both under slavery and after slavery. After slavery, there is a huge revival movement in Jamaica. And that revival movement was out of that Bedward in Jamaica came, attracted thousands of people. And he had a theology. He had a very clear understanding of the humanity of the people who were being exploited on the plantations. And Bedward is a lot of the people who were active in the early Rastafari movement in the 1930s had emerged from the Bedward movement, and some of them from the Garvey movement. So you could say that the Rastafari movement, which is now a global movement, had its roots in these three movements: revival, Bedwardism, Garveyism. So that the issues that we are discussing here about our spiritual life, about the integrity of our doctrines, about how these need to be generated by us for ourselves. People have been doing this on the ground for centuries. It's just that the educated path very often leads us away from the inquiries which are underway under our noses, and they are dealing with similar questions and have come up with answers. And it's like, you know, it's a battle between the colonial tradition and the indigenous intellectual cultural resources which exist in all Caribbean societies and which are a function of the traditions that our different peoples brought here, or which were here before enslavement or indentureship. So this leads me to an important conclusion. We must not look down on the knowledge that grassroots people in the Caribbean or wherever have. And there's a huge, I was talking to a colleague in Ghana this week, and he was pointing out that in the great flu epidemic in West Africa, before they got the vaccine against the flu, the British summoned all the traditional healers in the then Gold Coast and Nigeria to a meeting to find out what was it that they were doing in order to prevent the flu from spreading. What were the herbs, the herbal medicines and the potions they were putting in their soups and meals and so on. So the British knew that knowledge existed. And they knew in the crisis of that pandemic of 1918-19, before the vaccines reached, they had to consult the indigenous and traditional healers and so on. And similarly, it was good that at St. Augustine, you were bold enough, Candice, to take that initiative, because there are answers around us in our communities to the challenges that we face as a society. but we often don't see because we're not looking there.
Yes. So we need to not be afraid. We need to acknowledge that there is value, and there is truth, and there is, yes, a lot that we can learn without people are afraid, but they don't need to be. In fact, I am convinced that if we spoke more with each other, we would find out that some of the things that we thought were so are really not so. And it would fix things. Amma Babio is saying, Prof, I would love if you could write a book for children revealing the truth about Black heritage in the Bible so that the generation coming up can learn. This, in addition, she says, to all the valuable research and writing you are doing for adults, of course, for which I salute you. What I would want to say to Amma and to anybody else watching this is, listen, Prof has done the lion's share of the work.
I think others need to come in now and use the technology, which is really where you have to interact with the millennials and the younger people. It is in the technology, the use of the technology and the different media that you need to be able to engage with these stories. But I think Amma Bibio's proposal is something that should be taken up by others. But I would give whatever support I can to that. I did try many years ago to write for children, but believe you me,
it never worked.
It's not easy. But I did embark on that, but it is challenging. But I do think that it's an excellent proposal that should be taken up, so that, I always feel that we take advantage of the Black History Month because of the strength of the US media and so on. And it's a good thing on which to hang things. But very often we need to be thinking now what we'll do in 2022 in order to prepare for that.
Yes, I think we definitely need to be planning much further in advance so that we can take advantage of the opportunities that exist through technology, through social media, through the technology that is there. Definitely. This I am looking at the time. We have a bag of questions, but we want to make sure that certain questions are asked and answered. There is one question that Kathleen Reed had asked last week, and it was, how do we move forward from the concept of us as property and former owned or enslaved peoples? Because she says this mindset still governs our institutions today. And I think you've been responding to that question to some extent.
Yeah, I would add just 3 words, that knowledge, collective action, and capital accumulation. And
knowledge, say that again for me, please.
Knowledge, collective action, and capital accumulate, which is just a word for money.
Money.
So those 3, in my view, go together in so far as we're seeking to the knowledge. The knowledge is important for obvious reasons, because you're talking about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery, but also enabling ourselves. Knowledge is about enabling, right? That's when you do a program, you are enabling yourself. So the question always is, how do we enable ourselves? Every health problem, you have to go to the enablers, right? We're dealing with this, you're dealing with the scientists, they are enabling vaccines and so on. So enabling is the key critical work when it comes to knowledge, because what we've been discussing, and when we talk about colonialism, is the disabling of our people, a disabling process. and we're now talking enabling.
Yes.
So the transition from one to the other involves not only quantitative knowledge, but qualitative. And in this regard, our creative people, our singers, our novelists, our poets, our people who can write for children, and graphic novels.
Yes.
I mean, I'm now into reading graphic novels as a result of the Black Panther movies. But you can read Ta-Nehisi quotes with these graphic novels. And graphic novels portray and give information in a way that's similar to the animated formats that you have to deal with now with children. So you have the creative side in the arts and the creative side also in the sciences to enable our people to empower themselves. What you're talking about and what Garvey did was to find the ways through which we can be empowered. And that is the heart of what he was about.
Yes, so we're really having a conversation because Pauline is now responding and saying collective action requires unity. And she says, and I hope we get to this juncture as a people. It is so frustrating that we have little infrastructure. But yes, I think the unity is really what is at the center of all of this. If we work together, as you were saying, Prof, and have the funding to do it, then and it's when we work together that we really get the funding.
To problems. And whilst I'm not beating down individualism and successful Black people, of which increasingly there are a lot of people who are successful, but the vast majority cannot and will not be able to reach empowerment through an individual route. Moreover, individualism means that it's a me thing. Collective action focus on the collective pronoun we. And we is better than me because we is interaction, it's respect for other people. Me is for me. Me, therefore, tends to be more selfish and you get less out of what is possible when you focus on me instead of we or us.
And then I was wondering too, Joanna and Professor and everybody in the conversation. So I want to go back to three things you said, Professor, and add to the three that you just said, and let's make 9, right? It's so profound. You said something that kind of like revisiting the silencing, because there were so many things that were silenced and so many things that the volume was tuned up on, and that kind of formed some of our mentalities. So silencing, the re-education, and you said that has to be narratives coming from us. And then the third thing is this kind of idea of doctrinal reform, because we know that anybody could take a piece of scripture and form their own doctrine, but we know that this, line upon line, precept upon precept, we need to get, the full picture, not just part of it. So I think in revisiting this idea of this concept of property talks about ownership. And do we own identity? Do we own our narrative? Do we own the way we see ourselves? Do we own the way media portrays us? Do we own it? Or do we have any sort of rights to it? There's no sense of royalties because did it really come from us? So all these things we need to think about. And while you're talking about there, I just thinking, I want to throw to Nico that he should write an article entitled The Black Side of the Bible, because that came up in my mind and I know he reads a lot and I am just curious. So yeah, I will pause there and add these to You're 3 and we made 9.
Okay, and by the way, I don't know what happened when I disappeared just now, but I am glad to be back and unmuted. So, Prof, you mentioned something about the artists and the writers and these people. And by the way, Amma is saying that you are reigniting her passion and she's going to take up the challenge now.
Okay, fine, great.
To write for children. But last week, we were in the room talking about reparations. And I just noticed that among us all in the room, we didn't go out looking for people who were artists, but it so happened that everyone, we had poets, we had a dancer, we had singer, different artists. And so after the program was finished, we said, you know what? We should do a program which is a response, an artistic response to the conversation that we had about reparation, because most of them were saying, boy, they'd never heard most of what was being shared in the conversation. And so we are actually going to be doing a program. We haven't set the date yet, but we will be doing a program in response. And maybe this should be like a part of CREWShall conversations after we do a series, then we come with an artistic representation, because it really does make a difference. We respond with the heart to these matters of the heart. Wow, I am looking at the time, sir. And Candice, we're just gonna have to make some executive decisions now about where we go from here, because I have some friends in Zambia, and one of them sent me a couple of questions. He unfortunately had to attend a funeral, or else he would be here asking the questions himself. Roy the Seer had these questions which were coming out of, and I really wanted to find out. I don't know if you can tell us in a nutshell, Professor, what was Garvey's position on reparations? And then I'll go into the questions.
Yes, well, the position on Garvey, the movement was a movement of repair. The movement in establishing a charter of human rights.
Yes.
And in claiming the sovereignty for Africa and people of African descent, in claiming that they should have a space in the reorganization of the world. That's repair. That's what repair is.
Yes.
And therefore, you will find that the 10-point CARICOM plan was preceded by Garvey's Declaration of Rights of the Negro peoples of the world in 1920, 100 years ago. So Garvey was into repair and into reparation.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the questions back to back. Royd wants to know, how are we engaging the British government and all those who participated in the slave trade? He wants to know, he says that we have Africans that were returned to the continent but lost touch with their original families. So he wants to know, if realized, that's reparation, will the reparation programs extend to the Africans on the continent? All right, let me stop there, because...
Yeah, well, let me just respond quickly to this.
Yes.
I was very proud in 2015 when David Cameron, the United Kingdom Prime Minister, addressed the Jamaican Parliament, and both parties made statements critiquing to his face. This was a signal movement. Yes. However, over the past 6 years, I haven't seen much evidence of a follow-up. I know that COVID-19 has shifted governmental attention because this is a pandemic.
Yes.
But I'm hoping that the re-engagement with Britain will take place. Now, critical to that is the research that's now being done by Professor Vereen Shepherd at the Center for Reparation Research at the University of West Indies. And only last week, Lloyd's Bank of England issued a request for an archivist to work on their papers and documents and artifacts that had to do with slavery and the slave trade. So we are learning much more now about the British capitalism, British insurance, British banking, Oxford University and other institutions. So there's the search for knowledge to understand the significance of what took place. And your listeners would have heard from Professor Beckles that was, again, only a couple of years ago that the loan that the British government secured to pay the owners of enslaved people, it was only a couple of years before that bond was fully paid off. So the impact of slavery is contemporary. So we need, again, more engagement and more knowledge among our people. And we also need to be able to influence governments in that direction. On the African side, some of your listeners here may be aware of Amistad. Amistad was a rebellion by the Mende people on a Portuguese ship that was carrying enslaved Africans to Cuba, and they revolted. Well, the historians decided that it was no longer adequate to simply go to the archives. They took a trip to the Mende people a couple of years ago, about 3-4 years ago, and did a whole documentary, because people had in their memories and in their oral history knowledge of the trade. And I have a colleague in the United States who is working on the oral histories in Senegal. And we're trying to develop some work with respect to Cape Coast. So there is a lot of information that exists on the continent about the trade and the factors contributing to the trade, about which we need to garner in order to be able to know what that 300-year experience meant for so many generations of our ancestors, and why the claim to reparative justice is a claim that must be made.
And Nico is saying that this administration doesn't seem to be interested in reparations. This has been their posture from before the pandemic started, as far as I can see. You know, young people speaking truth.
Absolutely.
And Anord says, Nicholas, they are maybe afraid that England would stop aiding the country. So, you know, just all these issues that these different facets to the whole picture that need to be taken into consideration. And he's saying, how will the reparation help the Black community regarding mental slavery? Yes.
Well, you see, let me come back to the knowledge aspect. Part of the 10-point plan speaks about not only transfer of technology and access to education, but also knowledge of African knowledge systems, because there are traditions of African knowledge, of indigenous knowledge about which we were speaking earlier, that need to be a central part of the corrective and reparative process, of which is the ancestral knowledge of our people. Our people simply one of the features of the trade in enslaved Africans is that trade in certain regions of West Africa focus on people with particular skills, which skills were used in the sugar plantation systems. So it's not simply manpower in that absolute sense, also focus on areas that had particular skills in growing rice and growing so on, so on, so on.
Look at that. So there is no way, Candice, there is no way we can get all the information in this one conversation again. And this was part 2, So all it is telling us is we need to go study for ourselves. We need to go and dig up the information, and we need to talk to our elders more. There is one last. I'm going to leave you with a last question, Candice. How about that?
Yes, sure. So, as a young person, and I don't really like using the word millennial because it kind of sounds weird, but as a person within this dispensation, what can we do? I mean, you said there's a lot of information around, but I get this feeling that the information, like you have to have a starting point where to begin, right? So, Professor, where can we begin as young people to go through this experience of revisiting the silence and re-educating, redoctrinating ourselves, and taking the part of not so much the educated part, but the inquiry part. Where do we start this inquiry? That is what advice you have for us.
Well, my advice is you have a data plan on your phone. Every data plan can generate an ebook, a video. Google enables you to ask all kinds of questions and get answers. So we want to begin with a data plan. Everybody has a phone. Every phone can have a book. And as you accumulate different books or videos or animated materials, you're creating a library. So whereas for my generation, I went into a physical library, and I was glad that in the years after independence, they developed a whole network of parish libraries, which were very well kept and access books. Your generation, the millennial generation, once you have a data plan, you can have a library. So you have access to the technology to ask the questions. Of course, Google doesn't have all the knowledge. As you know, Candice, the knowledge that exists that is not yet in Google. And therefore, the data plan would have to be supplemented by work with people who have some knowledge that has not yet been digitized and made available. But I think you are going to be the person with your network to try to influence your generation with respect to the new ways of finding knowledge and answering questions. So I look forward to learning from you.
Before you leave, part B to that, what is one book we could start with? One book.
I would, that's a good question. A good question. I would go to Philosophy and Opinions. We started out with that, but I would suggest that you read that. Again, bearing in mind that it is 100 years old, but it's really a foundation source for a reorientation and a repair for Africa and people of African descent. And there are other thanks for mentioning. Okay.
I'm
My
bringing up this
little,
one too, written by Professor
yes.
Rupert Lewis, simply called Marcus Garvey, and it's an easy read with all the basic information as well, a good launching pad for information, etc. Am I right, sir?
Yes, thank you very much. It was written with that in mind.
See?
Written with that in mind, with
Yes,
introducing people to the movement and to Garvey himself.
yes. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the first part of this conversation is is that you were able to tell us about the catechisms. You were able to tell us about how this all fit in with scripture and how the foundation of Garvey's work was scriptural and spiritual. And this is what we need to to kind of give us the freedom then to to launch out into this project. I'm so happy that we had these young people in the room. And let me
I'm very
tell you,
happy too.
yes, conversation going on all the time, not even sharing, between and amongst them, and who challenging who to do what and all of these things. This is really good. And Nico, so good for your contribution. So happy for it. Anord, so happy for your contribution, and especially as somebody coming from the African continent, making your contribution to the conversation. Anya has been listening in, we know, and she's busy doing some other things now, dealing with even the next generation after that generation. So, but I know that we will continue this very crucial conversation. We've been happy to have Dr. Vivian Peter in the room as well, making comments. When I say in the room, I mean following through with us on Facebook. Dr. Peter, so happy that as a historian, you are right here. And she said that Arts and Cultural Foundation was set by him, meaning Garvey. And all those performers that gathered at Edelweiss Park downtown was phenomenal. I don't know those details, so that is more story that we need to go and dig up, Candice. And Amma Babio is saying, I once used philosophy and opinions with a group of grade 5 students, and they were fascinated that we had our own philosopher. No, really, those grade 5 students need to understand that they themselves are quite likely philosophers. I always wondered why we waited until college to teach philosophy when our children are philosophizing, you know. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, but not separate from this conversation. Because yes, we are, you see how many different generations are represented here? This is this is the future. This is where we are going. And we are happy to know that is not flesh and blood that is leading us in this, the Spirit of God. Malachi 3, verse 16 says that, and then they spoke, those who feared the Lord spoke with each other. And a book of remembrance was opened. Yes. So the book of remembrance is what we need to look at. There is a sound that I'm hearing, and I'm not quite sure where it is coming from. Maybe some feedback somewhere. Yeah, it gone now. And Errol Bean is saying, more enlightening conversation. Awesome. I want to direct people also to the third issue of the KW magazine, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture. And in this issue, there is information, there's a timeline of Marcus Garvey's life, and there are so many other things. I'm asking Dana to just put the link There are 2 links. One where you can simply read the magazine for free on ISU. And then there's the other one. If you want to see us continue this work, then you can support the work by downloading the magazine at spuropen.com. So Dana is going to be posting that. Nico is having one last word here. We might have to deal with the language issue first, though, or at least alongside that. Not a conversation, but we are going to go into that conversation at another time, Nico and everyone else. So we're going on now. And as we go, we are beg God to bless unu and keep unu. We are begging him to smile upon unu. We are begging him to show unu in love, even though none of we no deserve it. And we are beg God to look upon we and give we firm peace today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day until him come back. Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Sir Lewis. This was indeed another wonderful, crucial conversation. Candice, thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming on a what good and one love.
Thank you.